So welcome to the webinar. Today is June 29th. Myself, Brandon Siraka, Layla Pintar, and Keith Ebbs presenting today. As mentioned, type in the chat why you joined today, what you hope to get out of today, and as well as your name, company you work with, and email address can be entered to win 10% off. So Fortec is an environmental services company located in Western Canada. We have a focus on quality, accuracy, and safety. So today my section on today's webinar is I'm going to focus on Alberta wildfire and some of the statistics, what's currently going on in the province. So here's a bit about myself, a photo of me out in the woods last spring. So I'm a registered professional forest technologist in Alberta. I'm part of the Alberta Association of Forest Management Professionals as well. I'm studying to get my RFT in British Columbia. Should be done that in the next couple months. I have 15 years of experience in the forest industry. I founded a company called Fortec in 2016 and worked as a project manager for TDS Forestry before that. Before that, I was an environmental specialist with CCI Solutions. And I also worked at the NATE Boreal Research Institute, or now called the Center for Boreal Research, in Peace River back in summer 2014. So here's some statistics on the current wildfire situation in Alberta. So this is as of June 28th, 2023. So wildfires to date, there's 706. Active fires are 86. And out of control is 8.1%. Being held is 34%. Under control is 56%. So I think that number's changed a lot over the last few weeks with all the rain we've been getting. Less out of control fires now than there was, but so here's a photo of the current wildfire map as of June 28th in Alberta. So you can see some of the big fires here, right in the Edson area and up towards Swan Hills, and as well as up north, there's like ones in Rainbow and over by Fox Lake. Those are some of the big out of control ones still. So we have out of control, being held, under control, and mutual aid, color coded ones on the map. So you can find this on I think we have a link somewhere coming up, but it's basically you can find it on Alberta Wildfire. So these are the number of wildfires by forest area. And this is a really interesting slide here, is a total hectares burned. So this year so far, we have over 1.4 million hectares burnt in Alberta, which is pretty unprecedented. Not a normal fire year by no means. It's a lot of hectares, and we're going to go and look into some comparisons of this year's hectares versus other year's hectares here in a few minutes. So this is by forest area. So there's the Edson, Fort McMurray. Just keep going down. So obviously the most significant is in the Slave Lake forest area. Second would be High Level, and then Edson. Five-year wildfire comparison. This is number of fires. I think the next slide's hectares. So yeah, this is a really interesting chart to look at. So hectares burned per year. So in 2018, we had 59,000 hectares. 2019 was a big fire year, especially in northern Alberta. We had the Chuck Egg fire, which I think was over 350,000 hectares. So off the top of my head. And we also had the one in Manning that was over 200,000 hectares. Those were some really big fires. That year, we had a large fire in Manning that actually burnt our family's trap line. So, and it burnt our cabin too, unfortunately. 2020 was a small year for hectares burned. 21, 54,000. 22, 130,000. And then obviously this year's, not even half done. And we have 1.4 million hectares burnt already. So it's unprecedented fire year out there. Do we have any questions in the chat? I don't have it open if someone wants to just read them to me.
Nothing so far.
Okay. So now we're just going to go to some statistics. So you can find all this on the Alberta Wildfire website. So here's a link. So there's some info on the 2018 Alberta wildfire season. Go to the next slide. Some more information on the 2018 wildfire season. So this goes into 2019 wildfire season, which, as I mentioned, was a big fire year. 883,000 hectares burnt, according to this slide. So you can see the 5-year average, and then you can see where 2019 sat, which was significantly higher. 5-year average ranging just over 200,000 hectares per year. All right, so this slide shows in 2019. Oh, sorry, this one shows large wildfires on record. So House River 2002 fire was 238,000 hectares. In 2019, we had McMillan fire, 273,000. Chuck Egg Creek in 2019, so it would have been the high level fire, 350,000 hectares. 1982, 409,000 hectares. Horse River, 491. Richardson in 2011 was 577,000 hectares. So big fire. Some statistics on 2020 wildfire season. 37% caused by lightning, 63% were human caused. Total of 1,346. Some more info on 2020. (2021) wildfire statistics. So in 2021, they had 664 firefighters, 405 seasonal heavy equipment contractors, 44 helicopter contractors, and 23 air tanker and air support aircraft. And as you can tell, 2021 was a slow fire year compared to 2019 and obviously 2023. So we'll move on to 2022 statistics. (1,100 fires, 32% caused by lightning. So 2022 was up from 21 to 130,000 hectares, which was 91 aerial firefighting hours at night. Interesting. 189 drone hours. Any questions on any of the slides so far? Feel free to type in the chat and someone can read them off to me.
Nothing yet.
Okay. Anything on the Facebook Live?
No, nothing yet.
Okay. I think are we? Oh yeah. Okay, we're gonna move on to Layla and then Keith. So now we're gonna go over Alberta FireSmart, and I will hand it off to Layla. Layla, if you want, I can control the slides. If you just want to tell me next slide.
Yeah, for sure. So hey everyone, I'm Layla. For those of you who have joined webinars in the past, I've spoken on a few of them. Quick introduction on myself. So I've done wildland firefighting as a type 1 back in Ontario. I also helped out with the type 3, type 2, and then also here in BC for the type 3. I'm currently working for Fortec and I'm running most of the fire side of things. We do have a type 3 crew with a couple of people that are deployed right now. So for those of you who are interested in doing the type 3 contract, we are still looking for people. We have about 2 more weeks before our deadline has reached its max and then we're no longer allowed to take anymore. So like I said, I do have about 10 years of experience in the forestry industry, 7 are fire related experience. And I've also had the opportunity to do a lot of FireSmart work, Ontario, Alberta, as well as BC, and worked alongside a lot of people who have assessment certifications. So if you guys have any questions, if I don't have the answer for you, I can for sure look into it and get you the answer for somebody who may know the answer more than I will. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so Keith is on today. Keith, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
You sure can.
Oh, excellent. Good show. Sorry, that's I don't have my videos, cannot seem to get it working here. So, oh, okay. Hi guys. I just got a note you can see me. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I've just been camping for 4 days, so I hope I look okay.
No worries.
A bit of background here. I was on Helitack in Northern Ontario for 7 years, and I ended up as a certified provincial fire boss. I then moved to Alberta, and I worked with the air tankers for 3 years out of Edson and Grand Cache. FireSmart specific, I formed a company with 2 friends, and that's all we did for a couple of years in 2008, 2009 through Canadian Western Diversification. And so I've got a rather extensive FireSmart background here. I've been involved in projects, everything from training both Tsuut'ina Reserve and Stoney Nakoda Reserve on FireSmart techniques and fire safety and FireSmart principles in January, February, and March this year. That was awesome, actually. It was a great experience. And the rest you can just read right there. I've got extensive history in forestry for about 45 years. Okay, next. Thank you. So this is right out of the book. And there's really two components: educate residents and stakeholders regarding potential wildfires. And then what's the next one? Do you know? Next slide.
Brandon's presenting, Keith.
Am I not presenting?
Yeah, you can continue on, Keith. So the next one is who is responsible?
Oh, sorry. To finish off that first slide, don't go back, Janelle. It's really education and vegetation management are the two key components here. Who's responsible? Of course, municipalities, community leaders, if you can get your reeve or your band chief or your councils. Industry is obviously responsible because occasionally they start fires, like a tree blows out of a power line. All levels of government, federal, provincial, and national. And we can see all of those entities involved in today's firefighting here in Alberta. So it really is a combination of governments and industrial activity that really promotes FireSmart and are responsible for reducing it. Next. Thanks, Brent. As you know, wildfires are really a natural part of the forest cycle. For instance, in a pine forest in Western Alberta, all the way up to Eastern Slopes, all of that pine and all of that aspen are fire origin species. It means that they need fire to regenerate and build a new forest. As well, natural wildfires reduce all that litter on the forest floor that builds up over the growth cycle of the forest stand, anywhere from 40 to 200 years plus. After a fire, there is a big nutrient flush from all of that additional mineral and food that's entered back into the soil. So when we say a nutrient flush, we don't mean that the nutrients are flushed away. We mean that the green, everything that's green flushes more rapidly, young trees grow faster, grasses, shrubs come back. That is the flush from the nutrient itself. Help plants reproduce like pine and aspen. It also opens up the duff, and in the duff in Western Alberta, grass seeds of many different varieties can have an in-soil duff life of up to 100 years plus. So it helps rejuvenate and renew the whole forest floor back to an original sequence. As you know, a fire does not burn one area completely clean and green. So it opens gaps in the trees for new growth, but it also leaves patches. And as those patches, as the forest regrows around those patches, then we have increased diversity. So we have more bugs in the older patches. We have spots for mule deer fawning, et cetera, et cetera. Kills invasive species and pests, you bet. We have seen, obviously, in the last 25 years, the rapid expansion of both mountain pine beetle and spruce budworm. If we had unmanaged fire and unmanaged forests, the fire would actually help reduce and cycle those insects and diseases. And as I'd mentioned already, increases diversity. Next, Brent. So you'll hear this a lot in FireSmart discussions, is the wildland-urban interface. And it simply means wherever the trees, grasslands, or unmanaged lands interface with urban. And urban can be defined as a hamlet, towns, villages, cities, whatever. So it means that an unpopulated area meets with a populated area. And that's where a lot of fires start. And of course, that's where a lot of the initial firefighting and, most importantly, FireSmart work is done to help create fuel breaks and help promote FireSmart acceptable trees such as deciduous, and try and reduce or eliminate fire trees such as conifers, pines, spruce, etc., junipers. So pretty much every time you go for a walk along the path on the edge of the town or city, you are in the wildland urban interface. Next, Brenda. A fuel complex. Now, there's actually a book that's out available from the federal government, and it shows the different forest fuel complexes. And there are many, and they're actually broken into two different categories of dry, which is winter and or frozen, and green, which is summer, spring, summer, fall. So the fuel complexes have two categories, dry and green. And of course, the conditions that you get in the winter time, although you'd think there'd be less fires or less intensity in the winter, sometimes things like relative humidity, fuel buildup, and so on actually promote winter fires. And personally, I was on a fire in January 4th, north of Nordegg. We had 30-foot flames walking across cut blocks, and extremely dangerous, very low RH. So when we talk about FireSmart, what we want to do is alter that fuel complex. So we want to do vegetation management, and I'll talk about that here a little bit later on. Next slide, please. So in Alberta here, we started settling in Alberta way back in late 1700s. More commonly in the late 1800s, when it was really promoted for people to settle in Alberta. Calgary was a small town at that point. But of course, everybody builds, and we're still building. Since 1983 to January 1st of this year, the population of Alberta has doubled. So that's in 40 years. We went from about 2.1 to 4.2 million people. Well, that takes up a lot of space. That's going to increase a lot of area on towns and cities, but it also does something. There's a lot of acreages now, thousands and thousands of acreages, small farms, and especially for those folks that live in acreages or even remote settings, obviously your risk of wildfire goes into extreme. It is possible to live safely, and we're going to discuss how to mitigate some of those. Next slide, Brent. Sorry, any questions from anybody? If you can just let me know, Janelle or Leila, sorry.
I don't see any questions, Keith.
Okay, thanks, Brendan.
Carry on.
Thanks. So here's a very common slide. Within Alberta, within actually every province in Canada, except Prince Edward Island, the National FireSmart organization set up these standards, and you'll see them copied maybe in various formats, but the standards and the discussions will be identical for BC, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Quebec, Ontario, so on and so on, federally. So that information shared federally is picked up provincially and shared in the appropriate formats. So here we see a schematic, and I'll get into detail here. You see the unmitigated property where we have vegetation right up to the side of the house, and then we have wooden decks and et cetera, et cetera. So and on the bottom, we see, in fact, that we've reduced that risk, we reduced the continuity. And next slide, Brendan, and I'll start to discuss the different areas. So first of all, how do wildfires grow? So we have an ignition point, I think, in this year, Brendan, and you can correct me, please. We've got about 60% of the fires have been started by lightning, 40% by human. Fires need three things. They need an ignition, so they need they need an ignition point, they need fuel, and they need oxygen. And you can see the example here. Trees burn, coniferous trees burn much higher, much faster than deciduous trees. We see around the house here, we've got wood piles and sheds and decks. We've got what they call here surface fuels. So a surface fuel can be your lawn, as an example, and we'll get into how to mitigate those as well, and your structures as well. Next slide, Brenda. So how do they spread? Sparks and embers, obviously. So that's literally, they're being carried. There we are. And it's surprising how far and how fast material can be carried. We saw on the fire in Drayton Valley that it jumped from one side of the valley to the other in areas that, in some areas, it was 2 miles for that fire to jump. And what happens is there's a column of smoke comes up and it's carrying a lot of embers and a lot of carbon, a lot of pieces, even small twigs, leaves, etc. But within the fire itself, within that smoke column, the burning material actually slows down because it doesn't have enough oxygen in the dense smoke. And so really it'll carry, like I mentioned, sometimes several miles, and then fall down out of that smoke, reignite or come back into a glowing ember and fall back down to the ground, and the fire carries on. Of course, radiant heat, it can, and I've seen it actually, it was very, very bad and evident in both Fort McMurray and Slave Lake, Kelowna, of course. I have been on fires where the radiant heat was so strong that even with full fire pump pressure and even 2 pumps on a single line, that the water from the fire hose would evaporate before it hit, in this case, burning log piles beside a sawmill. So some of this heat can be easily 30-meter carry into your home or into a business, and frequently much farther than that. And of course, direct flame. And FireSmart is going to, oh, sorry. I lost my video here, Brandon. Sorry.
I think we can still see you, Keith. You should be good.
Yeah, I can't see you.
Oh.
I can't see the program. Sorry, I don't know what to do here.
I could take it from here if you want to jump to the next one.
Okay. You've got that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to go into, yeah,
Thank
we'll
you
go
very much.
into some factors that influence wildfires. So dense forests, so trees to trees ignition, basically what we've been talking about with Keith here. You'll see the photo here. So dense continuous forest. So when your forest is dense, like you see in the photo here on the screen, that adds a lot of fuels, a lot of area that can catch for the fire who's doing the crown fire and do ladder fuels. Tree to tree ignition you see at the top here. So when you're getting factors like wind coming through, if it's burning, that can carry an ember for quite some time and land into another spot, and it can kind of sit there for some time, and then it can create a spot fire, or it can smolder for a while and then it can ignite as well. And if you're looking at flames that travel quickly, so that's also something that to keep in mind with your winds. And if you're getting into some fire behavior that's pretty intense, usually you get some different types of weather that happens in that area based on what the fire is doing. So you might be having some north winds that day, and then you have a big roaring fire, and then you get a wind shift, which would create extra fire coming into different areas. And then obviously your fine fuels, the bottom here, that generate heat and embers. So all of these are factors that will influence wildfires. You can go to the next.
You want me to go ahead, Leila?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So obviously there are many, many factors, terrain, temperature, soil moisture, rainfall. There's a big one not mentioned on here. Relative humidity can have a dramatic effect. That's why we see fires slow down at night, because relative humidity, RH, goes up. Slope has a massive effect. And to go right out of the book on FireSmart, typical complete 100% fuel break on flat ground would be 30 meters. As soon as we go to 15% slope, we actually double that, the width of the fuel break, simply because of convectivity, and then of course downwinds in the morning and upwinds in the heat of the day. So obviously higher temperatures, and as I had mentioned first, very, very cold temperatures with very, very low RH can also have a dramatic effect on fire. Soil moisture and rainfall. Of course, if we've had lots of soil moisture, which Alberta did not have and Eastern BC did not have this year, then those indices slowly creep up, and ground fires become much more difficult. They burn much deeper, very much harder to control. So soil moisture is a key. Soil moisture also helps with the green flush of the nutrients that I had mentioned earlier. So if we have good snowpack, good early season rainfall, then we have an early green up. And it's in Alberta, we tend to have that aspen flush and the green up sometimes around, middle May, sometimes early May in the south to late May in the north. And we'll see that some of the most intense fires, or the most rapidly moving fires will be in May, actually, late April, May, early June, until those summer rains come. Next slide, please. Three main factors influence wildfire on your property. So this is to the acreage owners and small villages, hamlets especially. Yard maintenance is key. Please go ahead and water your flower beds. I'll get into details here in a second. Tree spacing is very, very important. If you have continuous coniferous, especially tree cover from the surrounding forest in towards the house, then we're going to go into a standard called 3 to 6 meter spacing. There we are. Oh, I've got a double screen. There we are. So in the immediate zone, does it have its separate side here, Leila? Yard maintenance. Okay, no, go to the next one, please. Thank you, Brendan. So in the immediate zone, obviously that's going to have the biggest impact. Is once a fire gets under your porch or gets into the wall or gets into your foundation, it's very, very difficult to get it out. And we're calling that zone the 0 to 1.5 meters. So everything right around the base of your house. And I'm going to talk a little bit later here about xeric landscaping. In the intermediate zone, which is 1 to 10 meters away from the actual edge of your house or deck, what we see here is an excellent example. We want to keep the conifer trees as much removed from your buildings as possible. And hopefully that's green lawn that's well watered or well maintained. Cut the grass reasonably short. And make sure that when you're planting shrubs or species around your house or on the lawn, that they are deciduous shrubs. Next slide. Tree spacing, right out of the book again. When we're in a conifer situation, we want to space tree crowns. So not the bole of the tree itself, but the distance from the outermost branches, 3 to 6 meters apart. And FireSmart also does allow us, though, to either have that in single trees or in clumps. So if you have 3 or 4 really nice spruce trees in a clump, just make sure that they're well separated from the rest of the conifers around the edge of your yard. Next slide. So not only by getting that spacing out can we reduce the connection from one tree to the other, both on radiant heat and convection. What we do is prune trees. And when we talk to the professional firefighters, what they want to do is they want to be able to knock that fire down out of the trees and get it onto the ground where they can fight it. Very difficult or impossible to fight crown fires from the ground. Has to be done aerially, but if we can knock that down and get that fire down on the ground, then you can actually fight it much more efficiently. So the standard is prune trees to 2 meters. Next slide. Any questions so far? Okay, next one. Do we have any questions coming in, Layla, Janelle?
Nope, you're all good still.
Okay. So, like I'd mentioned before, we've got the 3 zones. The immediate zone is 0 to 1.5 meters. The intermediate zone is 0 to 10, and the extended zone. Now, the extended zone, if you're on an acreage, may well be your neighbor's property. So communication is key here. If you're going to FireSmart your property, but yet your house may be close to a fence line or the edge of your property or so on, you may want to address that with your neighbors. Also, by the way, if you're on an acreage with crown land in the background, then you want to address that with either grazing lease managers or fire coordinators from the local agriculture and forestry office. So always look over the fence, see what your neighbors are doing, make sure that they can see what you're doing. So those are the 3 zones. Next slide, please. Okay, I've mentioned this one: immediate zone 0 to 1.5, 1.5 to 10, and 10 to 30 meters. The extended zone, by the way, can actually be, you can extend that right out to 100 meters if you wish, depending on your personal situation and, of course, your neighbors and who owns the timber next door. Next slide, please. So in the immediate zone, this is extremely important, 0 to 1.5. This is a non-combustible zone. So there's a phrase called xeric landscaping, X-E-R-I-C. And what it means is that you'll have nothing that can burn within this immediate zone. So it's a great place to put down like fieldstone around the edge, or flower beds, or gravel. If you have gravel leading up to a cement basement, that's ideal. So just make sure, go for a walk around the house, and there's actually a check sheet we'll see here at the end of the discussion that actually gives you details on what to look for and how to mitigate it. So 2 main areas need to be addressed: of course, the house itself and the landscaping around. Next slide. So things to consider, and again, this is right out of the check sheet here, folks. The roof, is your roof burnable? Do you have pine shake or cedar shake on the roof? What about the chimney? Is it protected? Do you have a cover over the top? How often do you use it? How often do you clean it? Gutters, everybody hates cleaning their gutters. And especially if you've got any sort of pine or blowing leaf, even aspen leaf, they all blow up onto the roof and then they slide down and nestle themselves in the gutter. Eaves and vents. Vents are quite important. Make sure that you've got screens either inside the vent cover itself or outside the vent cover, and make sure they're tight. Birds like to get in there and build nests inside the vents and inside your eaves as well. So make sure those vents and eaves are annually, at least, if not biannually, cleaned. Siding, there are actually FireSmart standards for siding, and of course plastic, wood cladding and so on are not preferred. Windows should be double or triple pane. Doors, if possible, and I know a lot of acreage owners like to have a nice door on the outside, but they shouldn't be made of wood. If you can get some sort of composite door. Decks, of course, almost all of them are wood. You can treat them, you can protect your decks, and I'll get into that in a second. Of course, there's wooden fences. Next slide. So the roof, and here we're getting into the detail. Use fire-resistant roofing materials. There's actually there's actually tar-backed shingles now with ground stone that are fire resistant. They're not fireproof, but they're fire resistant, and are much preferred over things like a cedar or pine shake. Regular maintenance, of course, if you get any lifted edges on these tiles, you want to make sure take some glue up, take some tar up, lift them up a little bit, put them back down and glue them back down flat so there's no areas to catch those sparks that are be blowing into your home. And you can install sprinklers. There's two sets. There's commercial sprinklers available. You can set up your garden hose and your lawn sprinkler on top of your roof, which my friend Barry did on both his shop and his house. When he was told to evacuate, he lives on an acreage immediately beside Drayton Valley, and he simply set them up on top and turned them on the whole time he was gone. There are commercial solutions, both on a pre-built or as-built home, that you can install the lines inside and have them come out on various spouts and spigots, or both around the house and literally right out of the top of the house. Or you can buy after-built, which instead of using a PVC pipe, which would melt, they generally use a copper pipe or a metal pipe. Even with an automatic sensors on them that will automatically turn on the sprinklers if fire is actually just like a fire extinguisher in the house. And these are relatively inexpensive. They're easy to install, and they will protect your home. Next one. Chimneys, as I mentioned before, get up there on the roof every year, have a look around, check your chimney, make sure that there's no cracks around the base, make sure that those little sheet metal at the base of your chimney are tightened down and fastened so that no embers can get underneath. And of course that the chimneys are screened. Screened, in this case, capped. They don't have to be capped, but they should be screened. Simply called a spark arrestor here. And of course, regular maintenance, make sure those chimneys are clean. If you can't or don't want to go up on your roof, you can get material that you can put inside your stove or your fireplace to burn out. Those are good, but it's best to get, if you can't do it yourself, get a professional, have them get up on the roof and clean your chimney properly. Next, please. Gutters. There are some great mitigation here for your gutters now. There's all different kinds of, there's screening, there's little overflows that capture water but let all the debris blow off. But of course, the big one here, whether you've got those screening devices or not, sometimes they get plugged up, is regular maintenance. Where I lived in Drayton Valley, I had spruce trees and aspen, and so did my neighbors. I had to clean my gutters at least once a month, and because they just wouldn't run water either. So not only is there a fire hazard there, but you may get some water damage inside your fascia. Next, please. Eaves and vents. So obviously you want the screening over the vents. It's very important. I cannot apparently attach soffit or any sort of fascia very well. I'm not a good carpenter. Get the pros to do it if you cannot do it appropriately and professionally. So again, like I mentioned up, even with the chimney, if you can't do it or if you're not familiar or not good at it, get the pros. Next slide. Siding. So here's some preferred sidings. Stucco is becoming more and more popular, and I agree with that. That's awesome. Metal siding, of course, metal might be out on the woodshed or on your garage. You may not want that on the house simply for aesthetics. Of course, brick work and concrete work is excellent. Cement board is good. Logs, as long as the logs are smooth, treated, and sealed, you can have very, very safe log homes. And the same thing with heavy timbers. Heavy timbers will have a structural strength equal and frequently equal to steel I-beams. And there's a couple YouTube videos online where they actually put massive torches under I-beams and wooden beams, steel I-beams and wooden beams, and they light them up. And the steel beams may not fail completely. What happens under heat duress or heat stress is they twist, and then your integrity of the wall is compromised, or the inside walls in your house are compromised. So heavy timbers in your house are perfectly acceptable. And of course, untreated wood. Some people even put shingle sidings or wooden cladding because it looks awesome. But wood and vinyl untreated are no protection at all. Next one. So immediate zone in the house, windows. As I mentioned earlier, double or triple pane windows are preferred. Obviously, glass doesn't catch on fire, but there is radiant heat will come through that glass, and double or triple pane actually reduces that radiant heat coming inside the house. And of course, that could start the drapes on fire. It could melt the window shades, etc., etc. If you live in an older house, go around, check your windows. Is there any cracks or gaps that you may either want to fix yourself or improve yourself, or do you need new windows? Are they old, dry wood that needs to have either appropriate sealing and painting, or replace those windows? Next, please. And doors. Everybody wants that beautiful hand-carved door on the front. I can't afford them, but some people can. But doors all have a fire rating. And if it is wood, then either have a fire-resistant paint or fire-resistant treatment on them, or get a door that is not wood. So, and the same as the windows, make sure that you have good seals around the edge of the door, that there's no cracks that little embers can get in. And garage doors, if they can, either have the fire rated doors and ask your dealer for the fire rating on the doors, or a lot of garage doors now can be imprinted and are metal, which is ideal. Make sure you're checking again the surrounds on the doors and the surrounds on the windows to make sure they're properly seated and sealed. Next slide, please. The house and the yard. Everybody forgets about the deck. Everybody wants a wooden deck. You can get treated decks, which I would strongly recommend. And very, very important, even more important than treating the deck itself, is make sure that underdeck and the understairs are completely blocked off, that there's not even a little half-inch or quarter-inch gap at the bottom. In this case, the example shows xeric landscaping here. It's got stone right around the edge. Make sure that the stone comes up and covers those little cracks under the access doors, or even have a little rubber floater attached to the inside of the door that makes sure it's sealed right off. Fires can get underneath, the fire passes, that didn't hit your house, and then 2 days later, the fire restarts underneath your deck because those embers have been living under there until they get into a more combustible or more higher ability to actually start the deck on fire. So block those off, both decks, and if you have sidings, for instance, a cabin or a cabin at the lake or cabin on the river, or in Brandon's case, trappers cabins, make sure that they're sealed around the bottom, that nothing can get under into those floorboards underneath, even if there's no basement. Next slide, please. So you can have wooden fences, and wooden fences, lot of DIY people make their own fences. I did. But as long as they are a reasonable distance away from your home, make sure that it's well treated, make sure that the long grass around the base of your fence is trimmed off, or even cut a wee channel underneath your fence and simply put in some gravel underneath. Let it come out a little bit. They can look awesome. And you can stop that bit of grass fire, ground fire getting into your fence altogether. And or, of course, use the metal fence and metal gate, which mitigates any fire carry into the house. The other one is where the fences connect to the house. Even if you have a wooden fence, you should really put in a metal gate. And if you want to paint it the same color as the fence, that's great. But you shouldn't have that wooden fence connected to the wooden siding of your house. Next slide, please. Landscaping. This is one of the most important. We want to get into the FireSmart term here is vegetation management. So you want to remove veg, remove debris, enclose the porch like I just discussed, maintain your flower beds. Don't let a lot of dead weeds go in there. And the other one for the flower beds, by the way, is lots of people like to use mulch. And if you're using, for instance, from Spray Lake here in Cochrane, they offer a wood mulch. And wood chips around the house, although they will decay, they are a fire hazard on any hot day. So I would discourage the use of wooden mulch. And of course, install those sprinklers, automatic sprinklers, manual sprinklers that you can turn them on, and you can even turn them on if you're forced to evacuate and leave them going. And again, I mentioned xeric landscaping. There's several houses in Drayton Valley where I used to live that are 100% from the sidewalk to the house and around the backyard. They have no yard maintenance. They do have examples of different prairie species in little points around the xeric land, so it's not just rock. But you can also make a very, very aesthetically attractive fully stone or xeric landscape. Xeric just means without water. So you don't have to water that zone, you don't have to maintain it, and it's fireproof. Next slide, please. Any questions? Landscaping your house, by the way, by yourself with stone can be very, very easy. You know, just go down to the local gravel pit, pay the guys $5 and get a half-ton load of gravel and cut that veg away from the edge of the house and put your gravel down.
So far, don't see any questions, Keith, so you can keep carrying on.
Thank you, Brendan. Next. So the intermediate, and intermediate here you can see is the orange around. It's away from that immediate zone. It's your yard. It's the landscaping on the yard, which is very important, and it's the fuel source. So again, maintain that lawn, keep the grass down low. My recommendation is do not plant juniper in around your house or cedar in around your house. I know they can look lovely, but it's absolute diesel fuel. So try and get those deciduous shrubs in there. Try and get deciduous trees. Aspen is perfect. Columnar aspen are awesome, and they look good. So have a look around. And again, the check sheet at the back end of this presentation will give you exactly what to look for. Next. Next slide, Brad. Thank you. So I asked my mom when I was down visiting, how often do you use the burn barrel? Every day, Keith. And the burn barrel was right beside the garage, and the garage was built of wood, of course. It was an older home. So I had Stuart and I actually moved the burn barrel out to the side of the yard on the other side of the garden. Fire pits are a consideration. Some municipalities, whether you're in a county or MD or in a town, will actually have fire pit standards. A standard here in Cochrane is 3 meters. So you cannot have any burnable material within 3 meters even in your private backyard, within 3 meters of that fire pit. Barbecues, obviously, are a consideration. Everybody has a barbecue in the back deck, or just about everybody. They can be very, very safe in fires and are quite fire resistant. Just make sure, and this is critical, that the barbecue is turned off, that the gas is turned off. The valves on barbecues frequently, or I would say always, leak over time. So either turn it off if you're connected to the house to natural gas or to a tank. Make sure that those main switches are all off. Just turn them on to use your barbecue, turn it back off. Power lines are a consideration. New homes frequently have underground power. Of course, everybody else has power lines coming in from the transformer at the edge of the yard. Just make sure those power lines would not be susceptible to tree blowdown, and or are they actually touching branches or leaves or material as they come in across your yard. And then on-site fire tools. A lot of people, including my neighbor, I have grandkids away, but they'll have a sandbox. And a sand and a shovel is a superb firefighting tool. It's also, if you can, leave your garden hose hooked up. Have your sprinklers ready to go. That sort of thing, that you can get them out there quick. Next, please. Oh, burn barrels. Sorry, I thought we covered that one. Are at least 10 meters away from the house. And we've seen about, I don't know, at least half a dozen times this year where various and or all of the communities from central Alberta north actually had fire restrictions on, and they actually don't let you use your burn barrels. So make sure that you're checking municipally or locally what are the fire restrictions. And obviously, if it's a fire ban, then you cannot even light those up. Even by the way, like they're on a gravel pad or something here, still not acceptable. Use a fire safe container. Everybody uses the old 45-gallon drums. You can buy commercial ones that cost way the hell too much. So 45-gallon drum is fine, but just make sure you have a screen over the top. Make sure that you either have your garden hose ready to go or a bucket of water that can sit right there, or fire extinguisher. Sometimes water in the burn barrel, Lord knows what's in there. Sometimes water will actually increase the fire. So make sure that you have an appropriate fire extinguisher close. And check again with your municipality for fire permits. Look for those bans. Next slide. Fire pits. Here's an ideal. It's enclosed. It has a spark arrestor on the top with a fine mill mesh. It's cement. And look at that yard. It's absolutely gorgeous. Short grass, obviously well maintained, well watered. I would still have that water close to home. In fire pits, almost everybody uses wood. Occasionally, by the way, there's things like fire logs that are instant starters. They are a bit more difficult to put out because they're embedded with some sort of a petrochemical. So make sure that even if you have water handy and it's close, that you have those fire extinguishers. Do not put the firewood beside the fire. Everybody has a fire in the evening. They get tired, the fire's still down to embers, and they've got half a dozen sticks sitting beside the fire pit. Make sure that those are safely removed. Check them to make sure that they're not hot, or that they're not that they don't have an ember on them when you put them back in the wood pile. And again, there's the mesh side, 2 to 6 mils. And again, check with your municipality whether it's a burn barrel or the fire pit in the backyard. Here's an excellent example. Next slide, please. Barbecues. So try and store a barbecue farther outside that immediate zone. Make sure that fuel sources are turned off. That's the key. and have an approved fire extinguisher. And I say approved because the fire extinguisher that puts out wood obviously will not put out necessarily will put out gas. Barbecues are quite safe. A lot of acreage owners have either natural gas tanks or propane tanks, frequently within 10 meters of the house. Those have been proven to be very, very safe entities. Just turn them off, so that you're not, when the fire gets into your building or into your home or into your garage, that it's not being fed by propane or natural gas. Next slide. Power lines. This is one that's a concern. Almost every home that I check or acreage I check, I have a comment on power lines because they want, people want to have, vegetated yards and so on. Make sure that you check for any trees that might fall on the line in a high wind, or make sure that there's no trees growing underneath the fire line or the power line itself. Especially conifer. A few small deciduous shrubs, no problem, as long as they're high up. A bunch of homes that we had FireSmarted, or the communities that we had FireSmarted, the individual landowners did not want their trees touched, even though in some cases the power lines were directly touching conifer trees on the way into the house. It is the landowner's right to not do anything on their backyard. But if you see your neighbor and have a concern about power lines, just knock on the door and mention it to them, or mention it to the utility company. The utility company, by the way, I believe they're obligated to manage trees around their power lines, but only if it's their disposition. And sometimes their disposition will end at your fence line, so that everything inside the fence, like the wire running from the power pole into the home, is actually yours over your property. Next slide, please, Brenda. So here's some examples of online fire tools. Shovel. Pulaski is simply an axe on one. It's a fire tool used in the bush. Simply an axe on one side and a scraper on the other side, 3 or 4 inches wide. Of course, any axe. Garden hose is very important. Sprinklers, attach them. Keep your sprinklers attached. Ladders, you want to be able to get up onto the roof if necessary, or to put your sprinklers up on top. Have some buckets around, even those 5-gallon Canadian Tire fishing buckets. They're great. And a sandbox. If I only had one tool to use for a fire coming, it would be the shovel. Actually, it wouldn't be a water pack. And I would try and throw material. Sand is preferred. That's why those kids' sandboxes are invaluable in the backyard. And they not only that, there's the swoosh of the sand push the fire away, but then that material that's burning is also covered up. Next slide, Brad. Thank you. Plant low density. Here's an excellent example. Those are broadleaf plants on there. So they're fire resistant. They're not fireproof, but they're fire resistant. Avoid mulch. Avoid that chipped mulch, or sometimes you can even get bags of fine ground wood that look lovely. They can be dyed different colors, but not very good for, as a matter of fact, avoid any sort of wooden mulch. Plant hardwood trees, and again, that xeric landscaping, that stone and rock landscaping. Next slide, please. It's nice not to cut the grass as well with xeric landscaping. So make sure your grass is cut frequently. Some people try and get down to the 1-inch length. We know that lawns are much more robust, green, and hold moisture much better if you cut them 2 inches or a little bit higher. Make sure that any branches that are down, that they're picked up. Trim the leaves and bushes around the house. Trim the trees up to 2 meters if you have conifer trees on your property. And of course, keep it well watered. Next slide, Brenda. So everybody loves trees on the yard, great for birds, great for fruit trees, cherry trees, apple, Saskatoons, and so on. But it's preferred if they're deciduous or fruit bearing that conifer trees are reduced or eliminated and replaced with fire resistant trees such as aspen or fruit trees. And again, maintain the trees. Some people put a little oval around the bottom of the tree. That's not necessary, but again, that stops any continuity from burning grass onto the bole of the tree itself. Okay, next slide. Again, this is right out of the book, the 3 to 6 meter spacing between the crowns of the trees in individual or clump trees, that's fine. Pruning, so prune up to 2 meters, 6 feet from the ground up, and of course remove all dead branches that are down close. Be sure that when you're removing these that you do them safely. The other thing is that when you prune, make sure you prune about a 1/4 inch or right on the collar, right on the nodule of that branch. If you trim them out too far, those little branches actually will rot back inside the tree and put a fuel path to get inside the bole of the tree itself. So don't cut them off with a hatchet or something. Make sure they're cut off with a saw flush. You don't need to paint them. They will heal over by themselves quite well. And just make sure it's a nice, clean, even job. Next slide, Brandon. So here's the resistant to wildfires, all broadleaf, fruit trees, and so on. There's an interesting one at the bottom, and that's larch. Some people call them tamarack. Right out of the national and Alberta provincial FireSmart manuals, you'll see larch is an accepted tree. It's a deciduous coniferous. So, and actually doesn't burn too well because that material is not retained up in the crown of the tree. That's why they're called FireSmart preferred. Next slide, please. Conifer trees, spruce, pine, fir, cedar, juniper. Everybody likes those columnar cedars beside the front door. They look awesome and really should not be in beside your house. Again, everything that's out in the yard, in the intermediate zone, should be pruned up to 2 meters, and any needle fall or any needle pine straw that's underneath your trees should be raked up annually, biannually, both in the spring and in the fall. Next slide, please. So everybody likes to have the firewood beside the fire pit. I would suggest that I would insist that those are removed at least 10 meters away from the house. Obviously, you want to store gasoline, diesel, propane, any oils, oil changes, rags, and so on. You can put them in the garden shed as long as that garden shed is more than 10 meters away from the house. I would suggest you put your firewood actually along a fence line, not even up beside the maintenance shed or behind the garage. You want to put that firewood away at least 10 meters away from any building. And the same with building materials. If you're building the deck and so on, make sure that you have those wood piles, that lumber that you purchased, at least 10 meters away from the building site itself. I know it's a bit more work, but that's preferred. And again, fuel sources within the metal shed. Next slide, Brendan. Questions? Comments?
Nothing in the chat on this end.
Sorry, Leila.
I said there's nothing in the chat over on this end.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. And here we are in the extended zone. So this extended zone may not even be your property, by the way. That's why I say it's important to talk to the neighbors. if it is crown timber around or municipal around your property, then talk to that municipality, talk to the crown, talk to the fire people or the land management people, and get their recommendations. And by the way, insist that they help you do FireSmart in and around your homes. So again, vegetation, rooftops, roadways. Roadways are important. They're a nice fuel break. And of course, any side road or any paved road that you have in or close to your home, that's a good place to actually either backburn or set up a sprinkler system that you can help protect your property. So actions taken in zone 3 then will obviously influence how wildfire approaches your home. Once we talk about community FireSmart, towns, cities, hamlets, it's frequently recommended that that zone 3 initial attack area or fire break would be 1, 2, or 3 kilometers away from your home, that they don't even let that fire get in the vicinity of the hamlet or your acreages. Next slide, please. Again, vegetation. You can simply use the handsaw or hand pruner. You don't need to use a saw. Notice that in this example, the saw is right very, very close to the tree. If you give your tree a little scar because the blade caught it somewhere, that's quite minor. It's like a raspberry on your knee when the kid fell off the bike. It will heal over, and it will not affect the health of the tree. Again, so 2 meter standard, 3 to 6 meters apart from the branches, not the boles. I would suggest removing small evergreen trees that would act as a ladder. So if you have a small conifer under a big conifer, the fire walks up the small one, gets into the big one, and away it goes. And then obviously well maintained. When you cut those branches off, make sure you take them away, burn them in the pit, or take them off into a landfill. Next one, Brendan. Roadways. I think everybody in the province now is very standard that you mark your address up on a little blue or white sign out on the front of your road, so that the emergency services know exactly where to go and that it's identified for them when they get there. Clear branches away from the driveways. I've done a lot of work here with the Calgary Fire Department and with the Cochrane Fire Department. And they said a lot of people don't realize how tall fire trucks are, that they have to break through these branches or drive in the lane to get into the home itself. And if possible, have a turnaround so that you can, by the way, can come in with the trailer or your truck or farm equipment or whatever you have. You can turn around. You don't have to do a letter L turn. You can simply turn in the space provided and head back out. Okay, next one. Roadways can be used as a fire break. Any trained professional firefighter knows that, and they have to have the experience and ability to know what to do and how to do it. But roadways are a perfect place to actually start the backfire from. And that simply is fire that's burning, it's intentionally lit and it's burning back towards the main body of the fire to put more distance between the actual flame and the fire break itself. You want as much gray ground or black ground in between as you can. Next slide. Oh, I would suggest to homeowners on that lighting up the road, let the pros do it. You may simply be increasing the fire if you're unfamiliar with the process and the parameters required to put in that backburn. Extended zone. In zone 3, have a look at zone 2 and consider, please, replacing all conifer species with deciduous. And I did some work for the town of Drayton Valley, and I asked them not to plant under power lines anymore, and that they take the approved landowner trees from conifer and make them only deciduous. I also discussed that with the fire department in Cochrane. Next slide, please. Get rid of those conifers. Beyond the zone. So again, we want a nice maintained yard, parkerize that extended zone. Beyond 30 meters, again, if you don't own the land, talk to your neighbors, talk to the municipality, talk to the holder of that land and see what they will do for you. And obviously you change the dynamics by managing vegetation. Remember at the very start, we said there's two components, education and vegetation management. And here it is. This yard looks absolutely lovely. Next slide, please. So here it is. You can look this up on any FireSmart website, whether BC, Alberta, or national. And it's actually a check sheet that gives you a score. You can have professionals like Layla or myself go and do this for you. Or you can simply download this, go around, it gives you a score. You don't have to be objective. You know, I like that tree, or, you know, the swing has always been on that tree, or whatever you have. It takes the emotion out of it, or and it makes sure that the assessments are done consistently. And it gives you a score over on the right-hand side. And you simply take that score, you go back into the fire manual and say, how do I mitigate this? So this is a real key for me. This is an excellent form. Oh, by the way, of all the 10,000 government forms and publications, nationally, provincially, municipally, the FireSmart books for landowners, homeowners, communities, industry are some of the best government information I've ever seen published. So get a hold of those. Oh, and there's a link right here on the bottom. Residential hazard assessment form. You can look that up on the net. I just hit it. This little form will pop up. There you go. And it gives you what to look for all around your homes and gives you that score. Okay, I think that's it, Brendan. Any questions, folks? Anything for Layla or Brian at the start? Again, a lot of this information is consistent. Here are the standards: Alberta, Canada, and British Columbia. Very, very similar. Formats will be a bit different, but the information is identical. Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, so just the last few slides here to wrap up, so that if you guys do need any FireSmart projects done, anybody on this meeting, you can feel free to reach out to myself. I'll type my number in the chat. And my email is just brandon.soroka@fortech.ca.
We have a message from Mehmet. He says, thank you so much, Keith, for one of the best presentations about fire smarting. We have learned a lot today. Thanks to the organizers as well.
Thank you, Mehmet.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a great presentation, Keith, and thank you for your time putting this together, and Layla and Janelle and myself. This will be posted on our YouTube account as well, so you guys can feel free to check it out, as well as we have 18 other webinar info sessions that we've done over the past 3 years. We have everything in there from reclamation to site prep to logging to cut block layout, tree planting. We're going to keep doing these webinars monthly with intent to provide education to the public and to those in the industry, as well as answer any questions that anyone has about specific topics. If you're interested in posting one of our events, one of our webinars, and you're industry expert in a specific area, then please reach out to myself or Layla on the screen, and we can look at lining that up. Thank you everyone for attending, and hope you have a great afternoon.